Welcome to Kicking Ass and Taking Names, the Business Owners Empowerment Podcast. I'm your host, Marlon Griffith Esquire. Join us on this podcast journey as we help you break free from the grind and get your business to work for you. We will delve into impactful conversations with business owners, corporate leaders, professional service providers, and industry innovators that will provide you with insights and actionable strategies that will transform your entrepreneurial path, boost your success, and put you in control of your business journey so you can kick ass and take names. Welcome to episode 15, A Journey to Franchise Ownership, a conversation with Allan and Kim Stephenson. Over 7 years ago, Kim Stephenson, a pharmaceutical rep, wanted to take a Pilates class. When she looked in her area, she found that the closest Club Pilates studio was located more than 45 minutes away. And she wondered, why do we not have a Club Pilates in Prince George's County? And that question sparked her journey. Kim started an exploration about owning a Club Pilates studio and bringing it to Prince George's County. Kim shared her vision with her husband, Allan, who had been a strength trainer, personal trainer for over 20 years, but was at a point in his career where he wanted something more, something else. He wanted ownership. And together, they went out to Discovery Day with Club Pilates. And at that moment, they decided to take that leap of faith to become franchise owners. They opened their first Club Pilates in Laurel, Maryland, a little over 6 years ago. And now, as of January of 2025, they now own 3 Club Pilates studios in Prince George's County. In our conversation, we explore and discuss this journey, the role of faith, divine intervention, and the one piece of advice that Kim got from her friend Eileen: see the process through. We'll talk about the lessons that they have learned over the past 6.5 years. Franchise ownership is not for everyone. But for those aspiring entrepreneurs who want to own their own business, franchise ownership is a popular business model because it has many advantages, including ready-made operating systems, brand awareness, franchisor marketing support, which creates lower risks. I said with all candor during my interview that Kim and Allan are 2 of my favorite people. They are truly exhibiting what it means to be a business owner who is kicking ass and taking names. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the next episode of Kicking Ass and Taking Names. I'm your host, Marlon Griffith Esquire. I have this episode 2 of my favorite people. Well, I like them, but let's just say their daughter's one of my favorite people. Allan and Kim Stephenson, how are you all?
We're good.
We're doing great. It's good to see you, Marlon. Always a pleasure.
I was going to say, you probably say that to everybody. They're your favorite people that come on.
Not everyone. Not everyone.
We have history. We have good history.
Yes. Yes. Our daughters are very good friends. They've known each other since they were, I don't know what, like 4 or 5 years old or something.
Yes.
Allan and Kim
Mhm.
are franchise owners, Club Pilates. And Allan just informed me they just opened their third studio here in right outside of DC in Riverdale. So now they have 3 Club Pilates studios. And guess what, folks? They didn't start off as business owners. So we're going to talk about how did we get here, right?
Mm.
So my first question to you all, right? Y'all met, obviously husband and wife. Y'all met at Hampton University,
Yes,
right?
HU, the real
Correct.
HU.
That's what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you. What is it? Is Hampton University the real HU?
Yeah.
There's nobody here to debate with us on it, so yes,
Yeah,
it's
and,
the real HU.
and actually, when we first attended, it was Hampton Institute. So we're dating ourselves.
That's
But
right.
yeah, it was still Hampton Institute, and I think it changed the university when we were there. So yeah, we got a little age on us.
But it's
There
still
you
the
go. There you go.
real
So Allan,
Yes, ma'am.
you
Yes, sir.
you was majored in criminal justice at Hampton University,
Yeah, I
and
was.
Kim, you are a marketing major. So from marketing major and criminal justice major to franchise owners. Let's talk about that
HU.
journey. What happened after Hampton?
I'll let you go ahead and speak to your journey first. Mine's a little complicated.
So for me, coming straight out of Hampton, I actually, as you said, I was a marketing major, and I ended up in New York right out of Hampton, working for Bloomingdale's. I was in their executive training program. I had haunted this gentleman every time he came to campus to do career day from Bloomingdale's, and he kept putting me off, and finally he said, come back your junior year, and it worked out. I got hired. I moved to Montclair, New Jersey, lived with friends of the family in their attic, and commuted into the city. And I did that for about 3 months, and I mean, it was a good experience. It was I was young, I was pretty immature, just figuring things out. And I enjoyed the experience. And I actually, in hindsight, wish I had stayed longer. It was my housing that was the challenge. So I ended up moving back home, and still staying in retail, worked for, without going into the whole list of different retailers, worked for different retailers. And then I decided I wanted to go back to school. So I went back to Howard,
The other HU.
and I started pursuing my master's in business administration while working at a local, well, actually they're a national nonprofit, the National Association of Negro Business and Professional Women's Clubs. So I was doing that and going to school part-time at the same time. So it was like a 4-year journey for me, in completing my master's degree. Came out, thought, you know what, maybe I don't want to do retail. I had done some banking. I mean, as a teller, when I was in college part-time. And so I thought maybe I'd take the journey of banking. And so I went into banking, and while working in one of the banking centers in Oxon Hill, a gentleman came in and who was a customer, and engaged with him. Long story short, he started talking to me about pharmaceutical sales and piqued my interest. And I was like, I like the sound of the flexibility. I like the sound of the money. They were really, and this was for Pfizer, and they were really trying to grow their people of color as far as diversity, if you will. And so I was listening to that, but I was really thinking about Allan, because he was teaching at the time in Baltimore, and he wasn't super excited about his job. So I was like, well, yeah, I'm good, I think, with what I'm doing. But I do know somebody that might be interested. Long story short, I think I went over to hear more information. I don't think you came with me. And the more I heard, the more I was like, well, I'm interested too. So we both looked into it. And for me, it was a lot of interviews, and they were expanding. So they had a whole new field force. And so anyway, I got in finally into Pfizer, worked at Pfizer in the pharmaceutical industry, got hired in 1996, and stayed with Pfizer up until 2009. They created a company with GSK, went over to that company, Vive, and then left that for a while, went into oncology for like a year and a half, came back to the HIV space with Gilead, which is who I work for now. And basically I've been in pharmaceutical sales since then.
Or a business owner who has a whole separate full-time job. Right, we're gonna park that right there. So let's get to the other half of the Stephenson duo.
For me, it was pretty simple. When I graduated from Hampton with my criminal justice degree, one of the things I quickly found out was that really wasn't a field I was too interested in getting involved in. When I was in college, I really started working out very seriously, and I really enjoyed that. So as soon as I got out of school, had a lot of odd jobs, then I ended up getting involved in fitness because that's really what I enjoy doing. So I took my first fitness job in Delaware and basically learned a lot about the body, about exercise. I really enjoyed that whole process. Kim and I had gotten engaged. We were about to get married, moved back to Upper Marlboro. And from that point on, I became a strength coach. So as a strength coach, I basically started working at a very popular studio in Columbia, Maryland called the Coliseum. Shout out to my folks at the Coliseum. And that was, I want to say, 2000?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in 2000, I started working there and just basically built my book of business, shall we say. So I was a full-time strength coach and really enjoyed that for about 20 years. That was my passion. Working out, learning more about the body, all of the latest exercise trends, all that kind of stuff. Loved it, but I had kind of gotten to that point where after 20 years, I was ready to kind of change my focus. I knew what it was like to work with people as far as athletes. You know, I worked with some college, some professional athletes. My typical clientele were people like yourself. But I really enjoyed that kind of interaction and seeing people improve in their ability to function and just do their day-to-day tasks. But I did want to step it up to another level where I didn't want to be so hands-on. I wanted to more or less either own my own studio and kind of be responsible for kind of overseeing things and having other trainers work for me. And it just so happened that given my skill set as far as being an instructor and a strength coach and marrying that with Kim's talent as a pharmaceutical rep where she's in sales, marketing, once we came upon this idea of possibly opening up studios, we were like, well, this is the perfect opportunity for us to be able to work together, combine our skill sets, and see what we can make of this situation. And as far as us actually becoming franchise owners, that's where I got to let Kim kind of go into that because we call her the visionary. She is the reason why PG County got Club Pilates. So I'm going to let you go ahead and expand on that.
I want to hold off. We're going to hold the visionary for 1 minute because before we even get there, see, the one I recognize about both of you all, even though you had completely different degrees and completely different paths to ownership, to just join ownership, you all had both a interest and focus on health. Yeah. You as helping people get better in their bodies and how they look. Kim, you from the space of helping them either recover or deal with, because one of the things you focus on was HIV, right? And that's obviously a at one point a very devastating disease.
Correct.
Right. And now obviously because of pharmaceuticals and because of the drugs, it's not as scary as it used to be. Right. So, but I really want to talk about that passion for help, because ultimately, maybe you don't even know it, but this is what ultimately drove you to Club Pilates. Is this in part is y'all both have a passion for health?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there is some selfish for me, some a selfish reason as well. But yes, most definitely.
For me, it's always been a lifestyle. I've always been someone who's, been involved in sports. I boxed when I was younger. I was into soccer. I started working out when I was relatively young, just because I'm not the biggest guy. And in order for me to be competitive, a lot of times with larger people, I had to really work on being as strong as possible while still taking advantage of speed and quickness. So that's kind of what precipitated me just always taking care of myself, always training, is because, I've always found myself in situations where if I had to compete, I wanted to be able to do it at a high level. So that's what really precipitated me staying focused, working out all the time. So like I said, it's always been a lifestyle, and I'm just fortunate that, everything kind of coalesced and worked to our benefit in such a way where we're able to express it.
So let's get to the visionary now.
There we go.
Let's get to the visionary.
The visionary.
So to your point, I've been in the pharmaceutical industry. It'll be 29 years at the end of this year. And I, have been content. It's been a great experience. And actually, I was a psychology major going into Hampton. The whole thing, the shift came when my mom said to me, I think it was first semester freshman year, you're going to have to go back to school and get a master's degree. And I was like, I don't want to go back to school. I'm going to do my 4 years and be done. So I switched. I was like, what else can I do where I'm working with people, but at the same time, so it still went back. But anyway, fast forward, I was content with doing my time, retiring and living life, doing wherever it took me after that. So I was not looking for a business. I was not looking for a business opportunity. He and I had never talked about a business opportunity. I mean, he was thinking about starting his own business outside the house because he did have the studio in the basement, but I was not. And I was talking to a friend who I kind of credit her with even following through, who lives in the area. And she and I were just talking about just different things and different exercise modalities. And she brought up Pilates, which I had heard of Pilates. I had never personally done Pilates. My mom, ironically, I was reading something she wrote in a journal that I remember her doing it years ago with the machine, with the reformer. But my friend Eileen, she's like, if you ever have a chance to do it, you should do it. She said, the challenge is, in our county, we don't really have it. There's no offerings for it. She said, and if you find it, there's very few reformers, and it costs a lot of money. And so she was kind of explaining to me, and I work out, but definitely not to the degree that he does. I do not have that discipline.
No one does.
Or that desire. So the whole throwing weights around, I do it because I need to. But when she was explaining to me what Pilates was like, I was like, ooh. And so fast forward, this was 2018. I was literally sitting upstairs in the bedroom one morning, waiting for Micah to get ready for school. But that particular morning, for some reason, I decided to watch Channel 4. And I was watching it, and this was right around the time they were getting ready to have the Health and Fitness Expo in D.C. And Millette Green was at one of these, at some place, and they kept doing teasers. And they were talking about, they're going to introduce you to, this new studio that's coming. It was in Bethesda. We have a special guest as well. And I was watching what they were doing in the background, and I heard her say that it was something with Pilates. And so I was tuning in. I was waiting for them to come back. And they came back, and she started explaining where she was and what was going on. And I'm watching the people on the equipment, on the reformers. I was like, that's what Eileen was talking about. And it really got my interest. I was like, I want to do that. So I was still watching, and then I started Googling, trying to find a location near us. And so I'm doing a whole bunch of things simultaneously, watching, listening, Googling, finding out the closest studio at the time was Annapolis. And I was like, oh gosh, I wish it was one closer. Panning the room and continuing to watch what was going on. Long story short, the person that she said was a special guest actually turned out to be my neighbor who was there coming in as an intro, taking an intro class. But that's really what got my attention. So while I was Googling, I found the Annapolis studio. I'm also texting my friend Eileen to let her know I found, maybe a studio. We can go try this out. And I call this divine intervention because I was not looking for a business, another job, or anything. And my eyes just started scrolling down and ended up at the end of the page where it said franchise. And I don't really even know, honestly, what drove me to hit the button, but I went ahead and pressed the hyperlink, and I started looking at the information. And, I don't know, I just started typing information in. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, they're never going to get in touch with me. They're never going to reply. And at the same time, she and we signed up for an intro class in Annapolis. And so we did end up going to do that. But they did get back to me. And so we started this online dialogue, and they were asking questions about finances and things like that. And I was answering it honestly, but I was saying to myself, how will they ever know if this is true or not,
Right.
Until, unless it gets to that point where, we're really seriously contemplating this. So then the next thing I know, I'm set up with these virtual engagements with one of their, I'm not going to say headhunters, but for lack of a better way of putting it, maybe like a headhunter or somebody who is facilitating the connection between, prospects and the franchise. And he initially started out explaining everything to me. So that was our first call. And he was like, okay, so what do you think? And I was like, well, this is, sounds interesting. So I'm like, okay. And I would have these calls, and then I would come downstairs and I would tell Allan about the call, and he'd kind of look at me like, that's cute. If, that's what you want to do, carry on. He didn't say that, but that's kind of,
Right.
So then we had another call, and he would explain more to me. And all during this time, my friend Eileen, we did the intro. We fell in love with the class, and we started taking classes. But we only did a 4-class pack, which lets you come 4 times a month. So because Annapolis and the traffic wasn't as bad as it is now. And, so we knew we could only get down there because we were working only on the weekends. So she and I were taking classes and having a great experience in the class, and I was engaging this guy, and I'm trying to think. So that I was engaging the guy. At one point in time, I got on a call with the president at the time of Club Pilates, and, was learning more information there.
So they were really trying to recruit you?
I mean, I think they were trying to encourage
mutual interests.
Right, exactly. And what happened with the gentleman that was doing most of the engagement with me initially, it got to the point where I was like thinking to myself, where are we going to get instructors from? More importantly, where is the money coming from to start the business?
All the small details.
Yeah. And so and my friend Eileen, because I'm telling her about, my concerns and my thoughts and everything. One thing she said to me, which has always stuck with me, and there's a reason why we're sitting here talking to you today about this, was she said to me, she's like, Kim, she's like, see the process all the way through. Regardless of what they say to you, regardless of what numbers they give you, see the process all the way through, and then make your decision. Don't, my words, don't tap out just because of something that you hear. So I'm like, okay,
sure,
fine. But I did get to the point where I was talking to the guy, and I started singing my swan song to him. I was like, look, I love the classes. I think the concept is great. I can see so many people in our area benefiting from this. I selfishly could benefit from this and have something closer to my house so I could actually take classes. I said, but I really just don't know where the money's coming from. I don't know where the money's coming from, the instructors or anything. He was like, okay, I understand that. And he was like, but you enjoy the classes. You see how it can benefit you and other people. And I was like, yes, I think it could make a huge difference in our community. He's like, how about this? How about you go out to a discovery day? It's in California where they're headquartered. You can meet with all the president all the way down, and they can tell you how they can support you if you decided to, take this leap. And I'm like, okay. So then I'm like, well, who am I going to get to go with me out to California for this? So, I processed and thought about a bunch of different people, and I actually reached out to like one of my friends. I was like, I reached out to a couple people. Have you thought about doing anything with Pilates? And they were like, no. So I went to Allan. I was like,
Finally,
okay. I was
the
like,
last guy on the list. I gotta ask him.
Only because he didn't seem like it was really something of interest to him. So I was like, will you go with me out here just to, hear what they have to say? And he's like, sure, I'll go. So it's an all expense paid trip. I mean, they paid for our hotel stay and everything. The only thing we had to pay for was really your ticket, I think. I think they paid for mine.
So
but anyway, we fly.
Before we get to the flight, how many conversations had you had with them
Oh
before then
gosh.
you said let's pay for you to come out for Discovery Day?
I'm gonna say, and I don't recall 100%. I'm gonna say maybe at least six. I mean, because I
Okay.
had multiple calls with the one guy who was kind of, I guess I'm gonna call him like a recruiter, for lack of, a franchise recruiter. And then we did have, like I said, opportunities to have calls with the president to ask questions. And there were some other opportunities for prospective franchisees to get more information as well.
So what type of, I mean, before we get to the actual trip to California, what can you just kind of describe? What were you discussing in those conversations you were having?
I mean, with the recruiter is more so he was telling me about Club Pilates. The first call was about the business, how it came into existence, just the history, and then we also talked about the benefits, all those things. The next call was about numbers. It was like explaining, like how the memberships work and the pricing at the time and all those different things, and giving you an idea of just how you what the revenue could look like.
Sure. Right.
Um, in addition to that, it was, um, the startup cost, all that, so all those things which made me start scratching my head,
Of
as we
course.
pushed it more into the process.
Sure.
Things became more real as we talked. Initially, it was kind of like, okay, and I don't, to be perfectly honest with you, I think when I first started engaging him, it was out of curiosity. I don't know if I was really
Sure.
serious, you
Sure.
know? Um,
Sure.
but as time went on, I started to become serious about it and more interested about it, but I still had the questions and the concerns about how's this going to come to be? How
How
are we
this
going to
going to
bring this
work?
to fruition?
Right. So now
So
you get
even
out
going
to
out to
Discovery
Discovery,
Day.
yeah, well, I was
Now
gonna
you
say,
get out
even
to
going out to
Discovery Day.
Discovery Day, it was
Yeah.
like, okay, let's just go and see, see what happens.
Something to lose.
So we fly out there, and they put us we're in a nice hotel, and the first thing we do after check-in is they take us to do a class at their corporate studio. So the lead instructor for corporate actually is the one who took us through the class. And there were other prospective franchisees there as well, and one who we are still friends with to this day, and we continue to stay in communication with Sam. But anyway, we meet in the lobby. They pick us up in this nice Mercedes van and take us to the corporate studio, and we get our socks, our grip socks, and we get on the reformer, and she starts doing basically an intro class, introducing us to the machine, and then starts taking us through the movements. I was already used to it because I had already taken some classes. It was new for him. So as we
Mm.
start going through it and everything, and she starts having to do the different movements, etc., he's over there, kind of getting into it. Like, I can see how I could work out like this.
Absolutely.
I can see how I can train some people like this. So
Okay.
he's
The
diving
wheels
in.
started turning.
So something
As
clicked for
soon,
you, Allan. Yeah.
Well, to be honest with you, in full transparency, earlier that year, I had, for what some might want to say, that conversation with God, meaning I had been strength training for 20 some odd years, and I was just at that point where I wanted to do something different. I
Mm-hmm.
loved my clients because most of them had been with me 15 or more years. So I knew them very well. I knew their families. I had a close group of people that I really loved. So that was pulling on me, but I knew I wanted to do something different.
Right.
And
Right.
literally, as we are going into Discovery Day and I start seeing this whole concept unfold, I'm like, this is it.
It clicked.
This is the
Mm.
perfect opportunity for me to use my skill set because I said,
Mm-hmm.
I can be an instructor. I'm sure I can pick this up quickly. I can learn the concepts. I can teach these classes. So I was like, you got one instructor. So Kim was still processing and I was
Right.
already there. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
this is a done deal for
Oh
me.
yeah.
I want to do this.
Yeah.
And she's like, hold on,
I
bro.
so yeah, so we did the class, and then after the class we had a dinner with all the department heads from corporate, and they had us interspersed between different people. So I mean, they were interviewing us just like we were trying to figure out if it was a good fit for us. And so that was a nice night. It was, great conversation with some really great people. I mean, they were down to earth. I mean, it was really, it was easy. It didn't feel like, like a strain or hard to have conversation. I mean, they were real cool people. The next morning we spent the day in like a classroom type setting where from the morning all the way to the afternoon, different people were coming in, explaining to us how they would support us. So, the president, of course, started out, and then we'd have, real estate. We'd have,
marketing.
Marketing and construction. And so in retail.
They took you through all the phases that you basically would touch on as you're more or less doing your business, promoting your studio.
So they explained all that to us. And then I think that day we went to lunch. And we were riding with another gentleman who worked with the same company, the same recruiting company. And, I had already in my mind, I knew where the studio was going to go. I was like, it's going to go right over at the Woodmore Town Center, right there by the Wegmans, because it'd be conveniently located so I can get to it. And other people can take classes as well. It's going to be a beautiful thing.
Right.
And so I had my mind on one studio. So we're in the van going to lunch, and we're talking to this gentleman. His name's Lance, and he's, asking us what we think so far, etc. And then it comes up to somehow a territory starts being discussed. Well, you can do more than one studio. You could do 3. That was the offering at the time, was 1, or you could do a territory, which would be 3.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm just listening. I'm still stuck on the 1. This one right here, he's hearing 3. And he's like, well, I think we should do the 3. So, this was still, once again, we're still, just.
She's worried about all the details.
We're thinking things out. And I even said to him, I was like, where are we even going to get instructors? And that's when he said to me, well, I could be an instructor. I was like, okay, well, we have 1, Sure. So I was like, all right, well, but then it still came down to the financing. And they were helpful in helping us think about financing beyond what you normally think about. Because it wasn't like we had some huge, amount of money set aside for something like this. I mean, we had retirement, whatnot, but not like some kind of giant nest egg that was, set aside for this purpose. I wasn't even thinking about a franchise at all. So, like some people, when you talk to other franchisees and people were going through, I mean, they had done their homework. They actually sought out recruiters for franchises and had them help them figure out which one was the best, which one to go to, none of that, So we finished our time there. It was a great experience, great interactions. We really liked the people.
I remember on the flight home, I was convincing Kim why 3 studios would be better than 1. And my thought was, this is it for me. Let's knock this out of the park. Something in me it was kind of like, yes, there was fear in the unknown, but everything in me said, if you do not do this, you are going to regret it. And this was probably one of those times in my life where I was just like, I gotta go for it. And I was like, I can't think of a better person if I'm going to go into business with than my wife, not only given her skill set, because I've always had a lot of admiration for Kim's ability. She's a very fast thinker. She's great in marketing. She loves to dialogue with people. She's like the social butterfly. So I said to myself, it's not going to get any better than this. I got to go all out. And because it's my wife, it's mutually assured success or mutually assured destruction. But either way, I knew she would be going all out with me because there was no turning back at this point. Sure. So I was like, okay,
we're falling off the cliff.
Exactly. We got to make this
financial cliff.
Let's talk a little bit about that red eye, right? Because I know both. Obviously, we know each other for a long time, and y'all are both very faithful people. Right? You're very religious folks. What role? Because you already said earlier that year you had a conversation with God. Right? So what role did your faith play in that red eye trip back, where you're now saying, having this conversation, this fear, this apprehension, all those feelings that's involved with you say, if y'all committed to, I'm about to take this leap.
So the one thing I'll say was going back to something Allan just said. If you didn't do it, the missed opportunity. That's one of the things we were talking about, because we said, if we don't do it, we know somebody else will eventually. And I'm like, can you? And the thought of that, I mean, to think now. I mean, granted, sometimes I always say there are days where I'm like, why are we doing this? And then there are days where we hear wonderful testimonies, and I'm like, this is why we're doing this. But I can only imagine if we didn't do it and somebody else did, and we were like, man, that could have been us doing this. We could have brought this to our community. I think there was a lot of that conversation. And the only other thing I'll add, and I'll let you say what you're going to say. I think we had determined, just based on our interaction, that while we were out there, that we really did want to take the leap and just take the chance. Even with all the fear that I definitely had, I was writing thank you letters, thank you cards already, because I was like, we got to send thank you cards to say thank you. Or actually, I was sending thank you emails, not cards. I was sending thank you emails, to the president, all the people that we had interacted with, to just make sure they knew that we appreciated our time, and and just all their insight and whatnot. And luckily, the feeling was mutual, and it was a mutually easy decision for them, as it was. Well, it wasn't as easy for us, but an easy decision for them to say that they were interested in bringing us aboard. But I don't know if you were gonna.
Well, no, for me, it was a matter of, this was in an area where my skill set was. So I was very comfortable with the exercise portion of it. I felt very confident that I could do that, and that I could be good at it. So that's one thing. And I also felt as if divinely this was an opportunity that was put before us, where basically it was more or less God tapped me on the shoulder saying, we had you said something to me not too long ago about wanting to do something different. It was almost like there was a side of me that still needed to come out. And here is your opportunity. Are you going to take advantage of it? And for me, it was literally that simple. I didn't have some of the reservations that Kim did, just because I tend to be one of those folks where once I feel as though this is something I should do, I'm like, on the way, the details will be determined and figured out. Whereas
I'm like asking our financial planner, okay, if this doesn't work out, can they take my retirement? Because I need to know I got some kind of safety net. So I needed to know that, we would, even if it didn't work out, God forbid, and he wasn't hearing that. Because I was all like, if we break even, he's like, I want to do more than break even. I just, I'm just like, I just want to make sure,
I wasn't doing this just to be average or just to get by.
So it seems to me like it's the balance. Like, if you were one person, this is the conversation that both sides of your sides of your shoulders having, right? It's the passion, you see it. I'm going to do this. Don't really know how, then figure everything out.
Exactly.
But then it's the other side of you that has to go, wait a minute, let's look at the numbers, right? And that's why obviously people who do, who enter into franchise agreements, they usually have like consultants or other people help them kind of see the things that they don't see. Right. Yeah, they just see, I want to own this, and this is all I want to, and I can do this. And there's a lot of other things that need to be explored to make sure that it's the best type of situation to be in. And what I find interesting about what you said, though, is that the commitment that Club Pilates had to you, because they realize that you're representing their brand. Wherever you set up, you're representing their brand.
And that was, I'm sorry. That was something that, to be honest with you, as we were going through that Discovery Day process, that was very impressive to me.
Okay.
All of the things that I was ignorant of, or I knew I lacked skill in, they basically were going to be supporting us. So that gave me more confidence in our interaction with the various department heads, because we basically got along well with all of them, and we asked very poignant questions, and they were very quick to give us very sharp, detailed answers, I was like, I could work with these folks. And between Kim and I, we can figure it out and make this happen. So they more or less added to my comfort level, given what we were about to undertake.
And 6 years out, people have changed. I mean, some people have come and gone and whatnot, and things have changed with the organization, the parent company, I should say. But overall, they've been very supportive. Yeah. I mean, I can't say we've had a bad experience. I mean,
it's been great overall. Overall, obviously, you're going to always have your issues.
COVID was like something that no one could have planned for.
Yeah, exactly. But overall, I would say that they've done an excellent job, and we could not be in this position without them, and we're very thankful.
Let's transition now from being a spectator, because y'all were spectators for this, to make this thing happen, and now you actually become business owners.
Yeah.
Right now, Allan, you are a business owner yourself, but you are self-employed solopreneur.
It's another world.
It's another world now, right? So let's talk about some of the challenges that you all face, and because I think your first studio was in Laurel.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Right, in Laurel. It's also in Prince George's County. What were some of the challenges that as new business owners that y'all was confronted with?
I would say probably the first thing is you don't know what you don't know. It's just blind ignorance. So, you start hiring people, you start your interview process, and all of that is a learning experience. And, you get your first group of staff, you start to get to know people, and then you're scared to lose folks. Yeah. Because obviously there's going to be a certain level of turnover.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the first big fears Kim and I had was people who played a significant role, their time came to move on. And you're like, what are we going to do without them?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you learn to adapt. You also learn more about the business yourself. And we're pretty good about understanding how things operate. So the instructor piece, we added to our instructor ranks, it allowed me to step back more and assume more of a kind of oversight managerial kind of perspective. Kim is always working both jobs. I don't know how she does it.
But I work my full-time job full-time.
Yes. She does her full, yes. Let's make that clear. Yeah,
of course.
I have my day job, and then I have my night job.
Then she puts her cape on and does the business. But with that being said, I think one of the first challenges was overcoming the fact that there's going to always be a certain amount of turnover. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes you obviously develop relationships with people, but you start to understand life happens for all of us. Mm-hmm. Circumstances change for everybody. And sometimes, despite there may not be any issues, but it's time to move on. Or folks, have a change of fortune in their lives and got to do things differently. So that was the first hurdle we had to overcome, was being able to let people go comfortably and recognize when one door closes, another one opens.
Can I interject? Because the other thing, and Allan, you hit on this, is one thing we came to know and realize, and I knew this just from observing someone else's business, that as best you can, you need to know how to do everything in your business. Not that you would be able to do every job in your business, but should you lose people, if you know enough to be dangerous, then you can get by. You're never necessarily beholden to that person. Because like Allan was saying, in the beginning, the thought of losing people, like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? But once you know enough to manage, and, once again, you got great support from corporate, we're able to get by. I mean, not that he would want to be teaching a bunch of classes, but he's an instructor. So if we lost instructors, he could step in and instruct. We're very fortunate to have a wonderful group of instructors who are, they're phenomenal. We have some who've been with us since we opened, and just believe in what we're doing and believe in, the passion that we have and they have for serving our community of Prince George's County. So they're sold on that. But yeah, the thought of losing people was so frightening, and that's one of the things I was like, we got to make sure we know, like, if we lose a front desk person, we got to know how to work the front desk.
Yeah,
If we lose a GM, we need to have an idea of how to run the studio, because I seen other people who have in other businesses who have lost staff, and they didn't know how to do anything or where anything was. So sorry.
So how long now did you have? Because part of what I wanted to talk about was how you can grow your business through franchises, right? So you had the Laurel location for what, like 6 years, I believe?
It'll be 6 years.
It'll be 6 years in August. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how long was it before you moved on to the next location?
Woodmore was delayed because of COVID. Basically, Laurel, I want to say, was about 7 months in and was growing rapidly. So we were very happy with our progress. As we're fumbling along, we're still growing and we're learning. But, as I would say most business owners would probably say, your first several years, you are kind of in survival mode because there's a lot you don't know. When you make mistakes, they tend to be costly. So you learn on so many levels, and you're trying to distill this into basically a recipe that will allow you to operate not only comfortably business-wise, but personally. For me, I've had to make a lot of personal adjustments just as far as how I navigate as a business owner, just to keep myself in a good headspace and healthy. Because now with us having 3 studios that we're responsible for, we have nearly 50 staff members. You feel a sense of responsibility, not only to your staff, but to the members, of course. So that can weigh on you. So you have to make sure you have a good balance between how much you are putting into your business as well as yourself, because it is 24/7. Not to say that you don't have periods of time where things are a little more settled, but there's always something to be taken care of. There's always something you are planning for. So you have to have a good balance between work and your own ability to relax and just kind of refresh yourself. And I think probably over the last year or two is when I've really started to develop that recipe of, okay, how do I get the best out of myself so I can be in a better position to help my staff, serve the members, grow the businesses. So that was also that to me was the biggest challenge personally.
Okay. Now, what caused you all? Was it a metric, a number, or was it the calendar? But how did you, when and how did you decide to go from one studio to the second studio and ultimately to this third studio?
So when we signed on, and I remember that day I was sitting in my car and we signed the franchise disclosure document, or just the whole agreement. It's funny because afterwards I was like, we just did that, didn't we? It's one of those things to a certain degree that, ignorance
is bliss.
And I always say if I, we did do as much of our due diligence as we could, but for me, if I knew too much, I wouldn't have done it, because too much information for me is going to make me too afraid to take that leap. All the what ifs. And so I have to sometimes just do things blindly. And so, with the information we had, the feeling and the engagement we had with corporate, we took the leap, but they have a timeline. Now, whether it's realistic to people or not is a whole nother story. But initially it's like 6 months, you open your first one, and then another 6 months, and another 6 months. So 18 months is the goal for the 3. But then there's, the reality of, for instance, with Laurel, it took us a while to find our first location because Woodmore was out of the question, because 24-hour fitness was there, and they haven't had an exclusive, which kept certain concepts out. So a lot of places that we went, Fairwood was out because Gold's Gym, same thing.
Sure,
so
absolutely.
Our broker, he took us to the top the highest or the furthest point, if you will, north in Prince George's County, all the way down south. And when it was all said and done, Laurel was what we really, out of what our options were, we really, really liked. So we jumped on that, opened that August of 2019, and then closed March of 2020, reopened in July, half capacity, and then had to grow our membership base back. So we went through all that. And during that COVID time, that's when, I guess maybe in 2021, the broker for, I guess he was the broker for the Woodmore Town Center, for those retail shops, reached out to our broker. And I guess that was when 24-hour fitness was having challenges, obviously due to COVID, I guess. He reached out and he was like, look, if your people are still interested, this would be a really good time for them to jump on this, because they're leaving and LA Fitness is coming in, but I think we can work something out with them. So we actually had our sights on, we were already focusing on Riverdale. We had already gone there. We saw the space. Whole Foods was there. It made perfect sense. But we did not want to miss out on Woodmore. So we put a halt on Riverdale, went with Woodmore, and it worked out in the sense there was a space that had already been used by Irie Cafe and some other things. So even getting in there was a little more cost effective than getting into Laurel or even Riverdale, because it wasn't a cold, dark shell. So a lot of things were falling into place. So it kind of made sense, once again, kind of like that, that divine intervention that was, pushing things along. So we did that, and we were like, prayerfully, Riverdale will still be available to us when we finish with Woodmore. And sure enough, but we opened Woodmore in 2022, and we went back to our broker, and we were like, we really want to work on Riverdale, but we're not ready to, go right into it. So he was like, that's okay. We can, kind of slow walk it. And we did. And so we started really pushing into it in December. I guess it was December of 2022, 2023. We start, really pushing into it, because it takes a while. You find, once you finally find the place, so that takes some time. Then you have to go through the process of the LOI and going back and forth with that piece of it. And then once you settle on the LOI, then the actual, lease comes through. Right. And then you got to go back and forth with the lease agreement. So their lawyers and your lawyer are, they're passing stuff back and forth. And then they're asking us, are you good with this? And that's a process.
And construction.
Right. And then construction, and then permitting in Prince George's County. So there's all that takes a while to bring it to fruition, and in all that, there's also then the members, because you're already starting the process of, promoting and marketing, and then, pre-sale, and then you're promising people dates based on corporate, which that can be a little frustrating. Corporate, they have a timeline, and so you're working on that timeline and hoping that things come to fruition. You're hoping that, permits come through, equipment
construction
comes
is done,
all
equipment
that
comes through on time. And if any of that in that chain is off, you have to adjust dates.
And we had to do that with Woodmore. We had to do it with Laurel, but Woodmore was a big one, and people were not happy. We did that. We had to do that with Riverdale. People, people accusing you of not opening, or, it was a whole lot of stuff. And I think actually one thing for me, and Allan was obviously, he's always been there. I think you develop a tougher and tougher skin, because in the beginning you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to disappoint, and you don't want to disappoint people.
Sure.
You want. And that's what we always end up telling people. We want this open more than you do, because every day that we're not open now, we're losing money.
Exactly.
That's right.
So trust me, we want these doors open way more than you do. But you have a lot of people who are upset, and you have to balance and obviously be sympathetic or empathetic to how they're feeling.
Sure.
And try to talk, explain to them the process and keep them on board. So it's a lot of dynamics. But yeah, long answer to your question, that is kind of like the time frame. It was spanning from 2019 now to, Riverdale just opening in January 2025. And that's it for us because territories have been pretty much bought up. The
Really?
only thing we're doing now that we're looking forward to is expanding Woodmore. So we're making it into a double studio, which that's a new concept now. A lot of other studios are now opening up double studios because the Club Pilates over the period of the 6 years that we've been doing it, and it wasn't really new then, it was new-ish, has come a long way, and it's grown so much. It's not like Starbucks because there's not one on every corner, but there's a Club Pilates in most areas, if you will.
So let me ask you this, and this is really for you, Kim, right? You know, the apprehension you had, the fear you had when you did the first and you decided to do it, right? How do you compare yourself now when you were putting together the Riverdale deal or putting together the Woodmore deal, as opposed to when you were out in California? What has been the change in you?
I think, like I said, I think I've just developed a tougher skin. I don't, while things still bother me to a certain degree because that's just my personality and my nature. I feel like I'm not afraid of you. Let me make sure I phrase this right. We never want to lose members. We never want to lose staff, but that's no longer a huge fear of mine. I feel like God has shown us that there's always a ram in the bush, because there were times when maybe we either were losing a staff member, or and instructors are our bread and butter. Our front desk staff is very important, because if we don't have our front desk staff, we don't have people coming into the studio to see what it's all about. But once people get into that studio, the product is, the service is the class. Mm-hmm. And so when we would lose instructors, it would be petrifying, because that opens up a gap in the schedule. And a lot of times these instructors are, members like them a lot. They get upset that they're leaving, but God would always make provision. There would always be, sometimes there'd be literally a phone call coming in, or an email, or another instructor's like, hey, I got contacted by this other person who's interested in seeing if they can work with us. So there's always been provision. So I see that, and I realize, even when things don't look like they're going to work out in this particular case, they always do. Now, I'm not going to say that I still voice my concerns.
Marlon.
Marlon.
Well, y'all are partners, because that's actually one of my final questions for you all, right? Because you all are in a unique space, right? Because not being partners is not unique, but being a husband and wife who are partners, right? So they theoretically can't have the same type of separation like you can have with a traditional partner. You go to your house, I go to mine, and maybe I see you tomorrow.
Well, you know what?
What do y'all do? Allan, you go down to the basement.
I go to one room, and she goes to the other. And you know what? Because I'm the one who was really pushing the 3, whenever she gets nervous, guess who she talks to? Me. So I am in my prayer closet, wearing my elbows, my knees, my forehead out, saying, God, you got to find me a ram in the bush, because I don't know what to say. But with all that being said, all jokes aside,
right.
No, one of the things is I've always just had an inner hopefulness and kind of belief we're going to be okay. And I can't always articulate how it's going to look, but I always felt that. And at times when we have had certain uncertainties come around, I just tell Kim, hey, this is where we got to be faithful and just trust it'll all work out. And it has.
We're still here.
But
we're still open.
You can only.
I want to speak to that, Allan, right? Because because I think sometimes people get lost, and when you say you're going to have faith and trust and it's going to work out, it's not that you just sit and you just pray.
No,
you putting in some work.
Oh
no,
yeah.
Well,
you putting in some work.
You work on those things you can control. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of things in life, as we all know, that are just simply out of your control. What I will say is, what I have found is whenever something is on my mind that we need to take care of, I make sure I do it. I'm very much a priority oriented person where every morning I make a list of things I need to do, and I knock that list out, or knock as much out from that list as I can. And I find as long as I am pushing into solutions and overcoming challenges, I feel as though that gives us our best footing to success. And those are things I can control, and Kim as well. So we focus on that. The rest is truly in God's hands. And that's all I can say. But I would encourage anyone who's in this situation that, yeah, you have to work on what you can control. You can't sit by passively.
No.
Ownership is a very active thing that requires constant participation, and you have to ponder a lot of things, because I'm one where a lot of times I don't like making quick decisions. I like to ponder things because I try to figure out different angles and what feels best.
All right, so that's some great wisdom right there, Mr. Stephenson.
He's our sage.
I don't remember calling you that, Mr. Stephenson, but hey, it's the first time for everything. So we are now at the end of this wonderful conversation, and as I do with all of my guests, y'all have been at this now for 6+ years, right? Almost 6 years. Right, in August of 2025. If it's 3 pieces of advice you can give to business owners or people who are interested in owning and getting a franchise, what would it be?
3 separately?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I don't know if I'll come up with 3. But before I say
That's
that,
why you have a partner.
There'll be 7 years from this in October-ish that we signed on the dotted line. So 6 years with the studio open. I would say my first bit of advice actually comes from my friend Eileen. See the process all the way through. If you have an opportunity that comes your way, don't allow the fear or lack of answers, to stop you from pursuing, I should say. I mean, obviously it's got to make sense. That's number 1. And then number 2, there are so many different ways that you can finance or open a business. It doesn't have to be, either your own money. It doesn't have to be a traditional loan. There are a whole lot of different ways that you can start a business, or franchise or otherwise. So I would definitely suggest people look at all your options. Because like I said, I was like, I don't know where this money's coming from.
Right.
So there's that for me. And I guess I would say also, we talk a lot about faith, and I do have faith, but I'm a very practical person too. So I think, just knowing how to marry the two, having the faith, looking back to just see how things have worked out, recognizing that they have, but also, being diligent to make sure that you're, doing the right thing, and the dollars make sense,
Right. The math must make sense.
Huh?
The math must make sense.
The math must be mathing. Yes.
Yes.
I would say first and foremost, you need to know yourself. I think that a lot of times people romanticize about what could be, but before you want to jump into a business venture, you need to know your own strengths and weaknesses. I would suggest you want to push into something where you have a natural skill set, ability. That is why the training aspect for me was very appealing, because I felt at least this is something I can do that I know will be able to translate into value for the business. So I would say definitely make sure you know yourself and what your strengths are as well as your weaknesses, because some of the things as far as marketing and various other operational aspects are not my strength. And I count on other people. So you have to have an honest assessment of your strengths. What are you bringing to the table? and what are you going to require of other people. So I think that's number one. Number two, even you never arrive. That it is success or working and feeling good is an ongoing fluid process. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. You are going to make mistakes. You are going to have failures. You have to be ready to accept the fact that you are sometimes going to push into your shortcomings or the shortcomings of staff. And you have to be able to figure out creative ways to overcome that. And also recognize what you can and can't control. Those things you can control, do it, and do it to the best of your ability, which sometimes requires having to take a step back and really ponder, because sometimes you're dealing with situations that can get complicated and you have to trust your own heart and your own instincts. So you also have to be someone who, at the end of the day, when you make a decision, you're willing to stand on it. Now, that's not to say sometimes you make decisions, you found out you made a mistake. You got to be willing to acknowledge that, especially to your staff, because what you model to people is what they take in. And being human to me and around my staff, asking for their input, wanting them to help me make certain decisions, I think is critical. I am not one of those individuals who think one person is all knowing and they then disperse all of the information that must be done. No, it requires a team. So you want to have people around you who you trust, who you like the way they roll, how they flow as people. And when you talk to them, you can talk to them about every aspect of your business and they will give you their best advice. And with that, you make your decisions. So I would say those are kind of the elements that I would say are critical to not only surviving, but getting to a point where you get comfortable with what I call is the busyness of owning multiple businesses. And it can be daunting, but if you have a good team, you know yourself, you understand how to keep yourself in balance, it makes it very, very doable and very fun.
Man, you know what, Kim, I'm going to say this to you. I don't think I've ever heard that brother talk this much in all the years I've known him.
We
got to catch up sometime, Marlon.
Wonderful, man. It was wonderful, Allan. You have some great wisdom. Kim, you have some wonderful wisdom. I love the fact that, that I remember you talked to me about this franchise years ago. And I remember how thick that packet was, and that would have been, that itself would have made people go, I can't do this. It's too much. It's nothing, for sure. And it takes, and the reason I wanted to invite you on my show is just exactly what I'm talking about. The attitude of kicking ass and taking names. And you clearly, both of y'all have exhibited that attitude, and you continue to do it because that's what you have to do to be a business owner. And sometimes, as you said, Allan, sometimes you can't see the way. You just know you got to keep moving forward, and the way will present itself. Right? Yeah. You have to have that trust and that faith in you and each other and in that process. All right. And that's how we sit here, 7+ years later with 3 studios and one expanding. Yeah. That's fantastic. I'm very proud of you all. And I'm very proud to call you all friends. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Kicking Ass and Taking Names. Remember, information is only as good as its application. So apply these insights and strategies and start making transformational changes to your business and life today. If you have not already, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and YouTube. Keep kicking ass and taking names.